So I am Sam, and I'm originally from Tasmania. I grew up in central Tassie, and Mum and Dad had a 1,500 acre farm down there, and I grew up with a very outdoorsy kind of lifestyle. I had three older sisters. I've got a younger brother who's 8 years younger than me, and so I spent my childhood basically with three sisters. And Mum used to work night shift at the hospital, and Dad was out running the farm. So during the day, Mum would literally push us outside so that she could sleep. And I didn't want to play with my three older sisters, so I'd go bush by myself and spend my entire childhood just roaming for 5 to 10 hours straight. So very outdoors kind of upbringing. There's a 1,500 metre high mountain at the back of our farm that at the moment is covered in snow. And the laptop over there is my very first computer that I've ever owned. I bought it last year. Sorry Joshua, can I get you to turn it back how it was before? This way, otherwise it won't. Yeah. It won't work. So I only bought that 2 years ago. I have a degree in mechanical engineering. I got my degree without owning a computer. My whole upbringing was outdoors. It's all I really want. A little bit like Patrick. Just wanted to get out and about. Mastered only I wore shoes. That was about the only difference. While studying engineering though, the engineering faculty that I studied with was one of the most male-dominated to ever pass through our university. And out of 200 students, there were only about 4 women, that included staff. And it was every issue you can think of. It was racist, sexist, chauvinist. In one afternoon, the engineering faculty consumed 32 barrels of beer. The lifestyle that went with it was horrendous. And it's got to the point where I realised that I wasn't putting my faith in action. So I went to St Pat's College in Launceston, and we had lots of different opportunities to get involved in all sorts of different faith-orientated things. So whether it be, we had Eddie Rice camps we could get involved in, there was a St Vinny's group, there was an Amnesty International group, there was all those sort of things. I didn't get involved in any of that. I was the captain of the football team and the captain of the athletics team and in the first 11 cricket team. And that's what I put all my time and energy into. And it wasn't until the end of my engineering degree I realised I really wasn't putting my faith in action. In fact, I was very much in line with the engineering guys, and I needed to do something. I was in love with the idea of going to Africa. I had no idea what I'd do. Maybe go over there as an engineer and dig holes and fill them with water. But I ended up, instead of moving to Africa, doing a bit of research and moving to a place called Sydney, New South Wales. Now, I don't know if it makes sense or not. It was the one thing I didn't want to do, so that's why I chose to do it. I joined Youth Mission Team. I had heard about Youth Mission Team while I was in Tasmania. Thought it was something nice. Good on them for doing it, but there was no way I was going to do anything like that. And it got to the point where it was almost, there was such a cringe factor involved in being on Youth Mission Team that I thought, okay, that's what I'm going to do. Just to really challenge myself. It wasn't so, in fact, I was scared of teenagers. It wasn't that I wanted to work with teenagers. I studied mechanical engineering for a very good reason. There are no teenagers. It's all metal and gases and fluid flow. So it was going to be challenging, but it was going to be prayerful. So I went away and did that for 1 year in Sydney and loved it, and I stayed on. Instead of going back to engineering, I applied to become one of the managers. I was the manager of the Adelaide Youth Mission Team for 2 years, and then the Melbourne Youth Mission Team for a further 2 years. Now, for those of you who've heard this talk before, this should be familiar, but I'm going to move in a slightly different direction in a moment. But while studying engineering, while on Youth Mission Team in those 5 years, it started to weigh on me to see the disunity between the churches. So I had been really aware academically that the churches were not united. I knew there was Catholic, there was Lutheran, there was Pentecostal, there was Evangelical, Baptist. So I knew there were different names. And I knew there were some differences, and that there'd been a Reformation. We studied that in grade 9 RE. But it really hadn't affected me. It was just head knowledge. But while working with the Youth Mission Team, and as a manager, I was being invited to sit in on meetings as a Youth Mission Team representative, and often with lots of other Christian groups. But a couple of times these meetings one time, everyone was chatting away about a certain project, and then I said something, and they all agreed with me, and one guy turned to me and said, "Oh, what church are you from? I haven't seen you here before." I said, "Oh, I'm from St. Benedict's Catholic Church in Burwood, in Melbourne." And they just stopped. And another guy turned to another fellow and goes, "Why is he here? I thought this was just supposed to be Christians. What's a Catholic doing here?" And they stopped the meeting and asked me to leave because it was supposed to be Christians only. Another time they were happy with me being there, but the Baptists and the Pentecostals were throwing their Bible across the table at each other, accusing each other of not being proper Christians. And it was getting out of hand. And I started to meet people who had lost friends and family because of what church they went to. I was always sitting in on meetings, I was sitting in on conversations where people were happy to fight one another or preach at each other, but refusing to actually listen to one another or dialogue at a respectful level. And the crunch moment came when I read the story of a guy who had become Catholic but lost his friends and family. His mum and dad disowned him because they felt he had disowned God by becoming a Catholic. His wife wanted a divorce because he was becoming Catholic. Reading that was like standing in a car crash and not knowing first aid. Just seeing something horrific in front of me where the church was at, and whether it was the engineering brain or the male brain kicking in or wanting to fix it, but the more I thought about it, the more I realised there's nothing I could do to help it. And so one day, but I couldn't let it go. It had really grabbed me. And so one day before Mass, I knelt down and prayed a very simple prayer and just said, "Dear God, I would love to help you, but sorry mate, you're on your own. I'm out, the problem's too big, there is nothing I can do to help. There's too much history, there's too much division, in a lot of cases there's too much apathy, there's a lot of people just don't care. I thought there's nothing I can do to help this." In the silence that followed, once I'd shut up, just in my guts, it felt like God said, "Sam, you're right, you can't fix it, but I can. I need you to pray for unity." And it became the one thing I could do, was prayer. I wasn't really strong at prayer, so that was enough of a struggle. Started to pray for unity, and started to invite some of my friends to pray for unity. But and not my engineering football friends, but my missionary friends. But a lot of them, the guys from the youth mission team said yes, they would, but all my other kind of Christian friends said no. We won't pray for unity. Unity already exists. It's just that you're not a part of it because you're a Catholic. Or they'd say unity exists, and when everyone reads their Bible properly, then we'll have proper unity. But basically they get pushed it away and say, "No, we're not even going to pray for unity," but they then continue to lecture and berate each other. I grew up with two heroes in life. The first one you may not know. He was an AFL footballer by the name of Gary Ablett Sr. He was awesome. The other guy was a fellow called St. Francis of Assisi. Now I realise they were worlds apart, right? But they were my two heroes. They were the two men that I had esteemed to be like while I was growing up. Spent all my time trying to be like Gary Ablett, though now was this one opportunity to try and be a little bit more like St. Francis of Assisi. And I was looking at a world map one day and very innocently thought, you know what, how awesome would it be to sell up? To sell everything that I own and just start walking. Do a protest walk though. And walk around the world on foot praying for unity. And stop in every single church I pass along the way. Whether it's Catholic, Orthodox, Pentecostal, non-denominational, interdenominational, evangelical, Protestant. Stop in every church I pass and invite them to at least pray for unity. Just keep it that simple, not engage in any theological dialogue, but just walk and pray. As simple as that thought was, it never left me, and over the coming year, this clicker will work, and that's not going to. Over the coming year, it kind of solidified your particular journey, and this was the route that I ended up taking. Actually, the red line is where I walked. As you can see, I didn't walk the whole way around the world. Right? This was not an attempt to get into the Guinness Book of Records. It wasn't an attempt to walk all the way around the world on foot. It was a missionary journey that was about prayer and inviting people to pray for unity, and where possible walking to bring attention to that. But it was very simple to that extent. Began as a consultant, years ago, in Brazil, and headed up to Edmonton in Canada. It took me 1 year to walk that far, walking 35 to 55 kilometres every day. How far I walked each day was dictated by how far it was to the next town. I then flew across the Bering Strait into Vladivostok and took the train through Siberia. We knew, I had an itinerary for every single day. I spent a year planning this, and we knew that I would arrive in Vladivostok in the middle of winter and be travelling through Siberia when it was on average minus 40 degrees Celsius in the daytime. So we decided I'd get the train through that section. There was no one out there anyway. And just stop off at each town as I went, and then walk on from Moscow, across the rest of Russia, still very cold in the middle of winter, down to Rome, around the Mediterranean, and over the Pyrenees Mountains. Now, it was a very simple mission. Pray for unity, stop in every church I pass along the way and invite them to pray for unity, and just keep walking to bring attention to that as much as possible. Very simple mission, but a very difficult mission to execute. In fact, I was held at knife point by 4 men and stripped clean of everything that I owned. I was held at gunpoint by 3 men. I was held at gunpoint with a shotgun, once with a rifle, that shotgun there, and once with a semi-automatic. I was beaten up on the side of the road a number of times. The shot you're about to see is in Russia. I took the film footage just after running away from the guys that tried to beat me up. I always turn the volume down. Hang on.
You don't have to shit this out like you. I'm off. No. There's simple parts. And then break my backpack.
I had to learn 9 languages while crossing 20 countries. I woke up twice in the middle of 2 countries with a man having broken into my room, and on both accounts the man hadn't broken into my room to rob me, but to get into bed with me. And I woke up with his hand in these 2 different countries already on me in a pitch black room, and had to fight them off in the middle of the night. Very, very scary thing to wake up to. Apparently I'm an attractive guy, but particularly when I'm muted. I do between Forrest Gump and Jesus. I also came face to face with a lot of animals. The worst of them being a puma in Venezuela. In the middle of the night we had a standoff for quite a few minutes, right on midnight. I was stung by a scorpion, struck out by a lot of snakes. I had to walk around quite a few active volcanoes. I had a huge earthquake at one point of 6.2, which really genuinely did rock me. I walked through temperatures from plus 47 degrees Celsius through to minus 33 degrees Celsius. Now that temperature is not just a little bit cold, it will freeze your lungs within about 30 seconds breathing those temperatures. I was also hospitalised quite a few times, had salmonella poisoning, typhoid fever, food poisoning 4 times. I dislodged my hip at one stage walking down a road in Mexico. I tore the cartilage in both knees, strained both Achilles tendons, had a heart arrhythmia, and I also had a cut on my left big toe. Now, that cut seems like the least of my worries compared to everything else I was going through. But because I was walking 35 to 45 kilometres every day through the heat and humidity of the tropics, that little cut was becoming worse and worse until it had pushed halfway out across my nail, the flesh underneath the toe. Bleeding profusely, had to be operated on. The first time was in Panama in Central America. It healed up very nicely after that, and I was able to walk on. But then it blew up again for a second time once I crossed the border into the United States. And as I headed off across the States, it became worse and worse again. And it was operated on for a second time in Billings, Montana. This is not third world medicine. This is like having your toe operated on here in Canberra. But the doctors had a meeting at the end of my bed and then turned to me and asked, "Sam, what's your pain threshold like?" And I said, "Average." And they said, "Well, we're really sorry. You've got a bad infection in that toe." They said, "There's not enough blood circulation for the anaesthetic to distribute properly. We're going to operate, but we're not going to use anaesthetic. We need you to grit your teeth and don't flinch. We'll be as fast as we can." My younger brother Chris had just flown in from Australia to join me for a month's worth of walking. He studied nursing, among other degrees. He didn't care about his older brother. He wanted to see what happens when you operate without anaesthetic. So he grabbed a video camera and started filming, interviewing the doctor. They've got their medical speaker going back and forwards while she still embedded, and pull that out, cut the flesh away, patched it all up, all while Chris is filming and turning to me and going, suck it in, you big sook, and continuing to ask questions of the doctor. So it was a very simple mission, but a very difficult journey. Once I made it, you can imagine getting all the way through that and then finally making it back home to Australia. I'd lost 14 kilograms, which I put back on. So there really wasn't much on me by the time I finished. Getting back to Australia and people walk up to you and say, well done, what was your favourite country? And you go, I don't know. It was a little more complicated than that. I nearly lost my life 11 times. And there's about another 50 times when it was kind of bordering on that and you didn't know whether your life was going to be put in danger or not, but it was getting very close to it. Then you got probably another 200 times when it was just dangerous. So many times, such that once I got back to Australia, I struggled to be what you would describe as normal. Because I had to do certain things in order to protect my life. For example, I had been beaten up so many times that if anyone was on the road up ahead of me, it was a little bit like you going home from this retreat, this conference, and there being a complete stranger standing in your kitchen with a butcher's knife, and you're supposed to ignore him, go past, get some food out of the fridge and go to the lounge room and watch TV. Like, it was that daunting to just walk past anyone on the side of the road because it had so often descended into something that was life-threatening. So how do I cope once I get back to Australia and I'm walking down the street and there's lots of people on the side of the road standing there? There's lots of young men standing there having a conversation. I look down and see me walking towards them, one of them just happens to stare at me. And in some countries that meant I was about to have a knife or a gun pulled on me. I'm growing a beard at the moment, not because I'm lazy, but because next week, next Monday, I'm heading back to South America and I'm touching down in a city where they are averaging 52 murders a day. Having a beard actually makes you look less American. So there's two other guys going with me, our beards have begun. Right, so there are lots of different things that we just take for granted in Australian society of what is normal. I was waking up 3 to 10 times every single night once I got back to Australia. I could not sleep through the night. I had to check my safety. And every time I woke up, it wasn't just a wake up and go back to sleep. It was a wake up, flick the light on, make sure everything was secure, go back to bed. Imagine doing that 10 times a night. And everyone thinks, oh, it's some sort of mental disorder or something like that. The reality was, though, only a few weeks before that, when I was still overseas, that's actually what I had to do. If you're sleeping outdoors, you're sleeping in a tent in a city where people have already been abusive towards you, and they know you're sleeping there, I had to do that. And there were times when I had to act because there was someone there, or because my life was in danger. So it took a lot of time to work through that. Here's one of the issues though. The very first injury that I sustained while walking was on the Amazon. I was actually on the Amazon River, on a boat. I had stopped walking and then I got injured. What happened was I slung my hammock. It was 3 days on the boat. They didn't have any beds to sleep in. They just had all these rails and you swing your hammock between the rails. And literally, the hammocks, there was about 300 or 400 hammocks just lined up one after the other on 3 levels on this boat, all rocking in unison as we went up the Amazon. I was the only what you might call non-peasant Brazilian on the boat. So I had a lot of attention, everyone asking why I wasn't on the cruise ship, why I was on the peasant boat with them. I slipped, I got into my hammock, and have you ever, when you put weight, I don't know if you've ever done this, if a muscle is tensed and then you put pressure along it and it feels like it's burning. Have you ever had a Chinese burn? I don't know if you still do those or not. Right? There's that feeling. So I put my left leg into the hammock and slid down and bang, tore my hamstring. Popped it at the hip. It burnt. It felt like there was a cigarette lighter on underneath it. and it was unrelenting. I'd really torn it badly, and I couldn't sleep. I couldn't put any weight on it. I'm in a hammock. How do you not sleep on your back when you're in a hammock? You can't sleep on your stomach bent up the other way. So it was horrible for months on end then with this torn hamstring. There are no physiotherapists in the Amazon. I couldn't get it tended to. And so just over time I had to try and let it heal, but didn't actually get any medical attention for it. Now, I was able to walk on. I had a slight limp for a while, but was able to continue walking. However, what I couldn't do was run. And it's a little bit like that with not just physical injuries, but with any sort of psychological or spiritual scar. Something that hurts us, something that someone says or does, and it hurts or it cuts, even if it's something that we'll just say it annoys. But deep down it actually sticks. And it's the same sort of thing. We feel like I can walk on. That, like, yeah, I can feel it a bit, but I'm fine. That word should be banned from the English language. Fine. How are you? Fine. It's a nothing answer. We can walk on thinking we are fine until we get to the point where, I'm not talking physically here, I'm talking spiritually, psychologically. We need to go from walking to running. And all of a sudden, we have scar tissue. And that's what had happened physically with my hamstring. Because I hadn't actually had it tended to, I can still put my finger right on where it tore and feel the scar tissue. It's very different to the muscle and the rest of the hamstring. Scar tissue has formed, and I'll probably have it there for good now, because it wasn't allowed to heal properly. I kept walking without medical attention. Same deal happens with us in our hearts. If we don't actively seek for something to be healed within us, we don't actively tend to something that's happened in the past, rather than just saying, oh, it's okay, I'll get over it, and just kind of burying it, moving on from it. Unfortunately, yeah, it remains buried until we need to go from walking to running. And that may be, for example, when you're in a relationship with someone, or you get married, or you have children, or you graduate from university and you're placed into some sort of work position, into a job. You might be able to keep walking now, but then all of a sudden comes a time in your life where psychologically you need to go up a gear. And you can't. You can't get out of the gear you're in, because it hurts to run. It hurts in that particular area of our lives because we haven't actually dealt with it properly. And so it's really important to look at what those consequences are of not seeking healing for different injuries. And it takes a lot of humility to do that. There were times, I've had so many injuries. I've had 14 broken bones. I even had my kidney split in half once. A guy ran at me playing football and hit me from the front and split my kidney in half. It took a lot. That was forced humility though, because I couldn't move and I was on life support, so I was just laying there for a few weeks in hospital while they tried to save me. So that was forced humility. But there were other times, like the time I broke my thumb skiing in Tasmania, down Ben Lomond at the ski resort in northern Tasmania, and there's a big red fire hydrant near the chalet, and white slopes, red fire hydrant. It's easy to see it. I thought it would be cool to ski at the fire hydrant and then go shh and spray it with snow as I went past. Being in grade 5, so I was only a small kid at that point, I didn't quite have the skiing ability that I thought I did. So I went shh, 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 bang, and hit the fire hydrant and broke my thumb. Now the problem, I actually kept skiing for the rest of the day with a broken thumb, just thinking I'd hurt and sprained it. It was so frustrating to then have my thumb and hand in plaster. And I kept trying to do things like play basketball with my broken thumb, and it kept hurting. I wasn't very good at stopping using my left hand. I kept trying to do things. My tibia, I broke my right tibia. I split it, boom, in half, 15 centimetre fracture right through it. I was on crutches for 10 weeks, but I was so annoyed that I was going to lose the fitness that I had that despite living 2 kilometres from the university, I crutched my way to university every day and then back home, just so I could do upper body strength and do some fitness work. Fine, my right leg healed as soon as I got off crutches. I had an ankle reconstruction for the left foot because of all the stuff I've been doing. So sometimes the actual slowing down to allow healing to take place doesn't come naturally. We almost need to be pinned down and told to stop, particularly if it's something that's hurt us inside. We see it a lot with relationships. Someone's in a relationship, it falls apart, they are devastated. So what do? I'll go with this person. Get straight back into another relationship. And the hurt is only compounded when it happens, or if it happens again, or they're not ready to, they've got the torn hamstring effectively. They don't trust as openly. They haven't dealt with the hurt or whatever happened then with that particular relationship. So does everyone understand the relationship between the physical hurt and the psychological and spiritual hurt? Right? It requires time for that healing to take place. While I was walking though, you can imagine walking for say 10 hours every day by yourself, right? Apart from when my brother was with me, right? 10 hours a day. What would you do in that time? I didn't have a mobile phone. I didn't have an iPad, an iPod. What would you do in that time? Pray? So I did a lot of that. I did a lot of praying. Would you be able to pray for 10 hours straight? I sang a lot to myself. I sang a lot to, not just to myself, but any animals that were nearby. You would not believe how many cows followed me down the road when I started singing. No, seriously. You start singing and the herd of cattle would come running up to the fence and follow me down the road until they got to the next fence and they'd move me off as I continued on. I occasionally was singing very loudly and a random farmer that I hadn't seen would pop up out of the grass and just stare at me. I'd stay quiet and just pray from then on for a while longer. I also had a lot of time to just think. And when I was in the United States, I met a parish priest in a town called Thermopolis. They have the largest hot springs in the world. And he asked me, he said, what do you think about when you're walking? You've got that much time on your hands. What do you contemplate? I said, well, everything. In fact, to this point, so we're now talking maybe 10 or 11 months into the journey. I said, I don't think there's a single thing in my life that I haven't scrutinised yet. Everything. My life goals, my ambitions, the decisions I've made in life, the mistakes I've made, the stupid decisions, the really good decisions, the relationships. I said, my relationship with my family, everything. I said, I think absolutely everything has been scrutinised. And he said, has that been helpful? I said, I don't know. I said, it's been difficult. I said, particularly when, and it was all of a sudden the conversation went to this kind of deeper level. I said, well, it has actually been difficult at times when contemplating the harder things, as in the stupid things I did. And it's easy to put a label on and say stupid, but you can go to there's many other words that you can put to it, for various things in my own life. Stupid decisions I've made, arrogant decisions, unholy, unfaithful decisions. Whatever it may have been. I said it's been really difficult contemplating that. And it ended up in this conversation with this priest about that side of life. And in the end, he made an observation. He said, Sam, it sounds like you've forgiven everyone that you needed to forgive, anyone who's hurt you. I said, Yeah, I think I have. Like, I don't feel like I hold any grudge against anyone. He said, yeah, well, he said, but now I think anyone that you wanted forgiveness from, you've received it. I said, yeah, I think so too. He said, but you've never forgiven yourself. I said, what? He said, you've forgiven everyone else and you've received forgiveness from them, but you've never forgiven yourself. You still hold a grudge against yourself. You're still carrying that. And he was right. I'd never even thought about it, never contemplated it. I've been to reconciliation. I had gone to people who particularly if I just said something really stupid that had hurt someone, I'd gone to them and apologised. I'd even been back to ex-girlfriends, when the relationship ended badly and mainly because I was arrogant. I'd managed to go back and find those girlfriends and just apologise and just affirm them and say, I should have acted with more integrity, whatever it may be. But I'd never forgiven myself. I'd always felt a bit disappointed in my own behaviour or in the way that I'd acted. And so that was a huge part of it, of that, what you might call that healing process, was actually being able to forgive myself. So the question, I guess, is raised then of how do you do that, how do you forgive yourself? And I'll get to that towards the end. I can come back to that. While walking, I'm going to kind of change tack for a moment and we'll come back to forgiving yourself. While walking, a lot of bad stuff happened. My mum was at me so many times to have someone walking with me. Mum, you can imagine your son decides one day he's going to sell everything that he owns and start walking around the world through some of the most dangerous countries on earth. I am still blown away that my mum at no time sent me an email saying, come home. This is ridiculous. You've nearly lost your life 3 weeks in a row now. Come home. Every time something bad happened, she'd just send me an email saying, I've just put $200 in the bank, go and stay in a hotel, rest for a day. That was it. That was the extent of Mum's come home. It was her support remained. But the one thing Mum wanted was someone to walk with me so that I wasn't alone. If I got into trouble, there was someone to help me. And so I'd been praying for someone to join me, and in the end, I honestly felt that God was asking me to trust Him and that He was walking with me, that I wasn't alone. I didn't ever tell Mum that. I just said, no one can come with me, which they couldn't. And so I headed off by myself, but with a support crew here in Australia that consisted predominantly of Father Dave Callahan, who was only a brother at that point, but he was on the or Deacon, that's right, you were Deacon Dave at that point. And Deacon Dave would jump on the net and I'd get an email saying, he was reading my blogs and my emails, so he's giving you a rundown of what's happening, a bit of spiritual direction, but he's also giving practical direction, saying, by the way, there's a low pressure system coming in the next couple of days, be really careful, the temperature's expected, will be cold enough to freeze your lungs in 30 seconds. Make sure you eat Mars bars and do maths problems in your head because your brain cells will start to freeze as well, so you need to keep your brain active. And I don't know if you ever remember seeing that particular email. And it was great. So he was doing a lot of this background information for me as well. But this whole notion of having someone with me, Mum was very strong, but I walked on by myself. The first people to walk with me were in Costa Rica. So I walked across Brazil, Venezuela, Colombia, Panama, and finally made it to Costa Rica, and had a youth crew come and walk with me. 9 people walked with me for the day, and we got robbed at knife point. Pinned us down, 4 men, pinned us down with long blade knives and stripped us clean of everything that we owned. I ran home at the end of the mugging. They'd stolen everything, and I got Dad and said, I'm just calling to let you know that I was mugged at knife point today. And he said, well, the fact that you're calling home seems to indicate you're okay. Yes, he said, I'll get your mother. And Mum was a bit more compassionate, and she was saying, well, maybe you should be walking by yourself. Maybe having people with you actually drew attention to you. So yeah, walk on by yourself. Yes, okay. But I walked on. The guy that mugged me, he looked like Che Guevara. Have you ever seen Che Guevara, the revolutionary who's on the t-shirts? You see his silhouette sometimes, the long black flowing hair. He looked like Che Guevara. And there were three other guys mugging the rest, and he just held a knife up against me, and he was he'd taken sunglasses and jewellery, and he was trying to undo my backpack. But with the knife pushing up against my stomach, he couldn't undo the backpack with one hand. And so he put the knife down behind his jeans in the back, and then reached up with both hands. He was only about this tall, but reached up with both hands to undo my backpack. And I'm standing there thinking, I'm going to plummet you. I'm basically standing there thinking, where's your knife, Shay? I am going to smash this guy. And it took every ounce of my being not to hit him. And basically what I thought I'd do wasn't punch him. I thought I'm going to grab his head and just do that. And he's gone. Like, he'll be out, he'll be unconscious, and then I'll move on to the other three. But I'm standing there thinking, if I take him out, the other three have got knives up against the others. Before I get to them, they might stab someone, and so I just had to stand there and let this guy take my backpack, knowing that I could knock him out, but I might not be able to get to the other three. And he took my backpack and they ran off down the road. And, while they're running off, police happened to be driving past and saw what was happening, and so there were two motorbike police. They started going after them, and one of the other guys and I gave chase down through 6 lanes of traffic that drew to a halt. There were police coming from the other direction. They drew their guns. They started to fire as these 4 guys disappeared off the bridge down a ravine. Mayhem broken loose. Next thing, there's cameras coming from everywhere, the news crews, etc. It was amazing how after that, I met one of them. They arrested one. I only found one. And I got to meet him. And have you ever seen the footage of Pope John Paul II meeting the guy who tried to assassinate him? He actually went into the jail and prayed with him. So this guy tried to assassinate John Paul II, shot him. The bullet just missed his heart. And then he went to the jail afterwards and met with him, prayed with him, forgave him. And so very much in the forefront of my mind as I went to the prison to meet this guy who mugged me. It wasn't this guy, it was one of the other 3. And I basically forgave him. And I walked on, quite honestly, not having any grudge towards him. He was actually very apologetic, which made it easier to forgive because he was apologetic. He said they did it for drug money, and that he was quite ashamed. He was Catholic. He took some rosary beads, said he'd been praying, and I walked on, having forgiven him. But more stuff started to happen, and I didn't really actually deal with it that much. I just kind of said I forgive him and walked on. Didn't really process it that much, but wasn't able to process it that well because bad stuff kept happening. It wasn't long after that I had some guys come after me with knives again, some guys with machete. There was another bedroom invasion. Some guys robbed me, like they took the money while I was out of the room. There was a lot of bad stuff happening. Then I got salmonella poisoning, then got typhoid fever, then had a stress fracture. And it just kept compounding. And then, by the time I made it to Russia, those who've heard this talk before will know this story. It was all covered in snow. I came to an intersection in the road, and 2 men in black came running down a snow-covered hill, ran across the road, and he started to speak very aggressively to me in Russian. And we saw the video footage before of me running away from those guys. It was at that intersection. And all I'd learned to say in Russian at that point was "Spasibo, pожалуйста," please, thank you. Where's the church? Can I have fish, please? I learned that night before in a restaurant. These guys weren't asking for fish, so I had no idea what they were saying. And after about a minute or 2, they just nodded at one another, and whack, one from the front, one from the side. They launched in, started to beat me up. They ripped the top strap off my backpack. They broke my 2 carbon fibre walking poles in half. They were really laying in hard. I ended up managing to get the guy on the left around the throat, held him at arm's length. And just as I did that, the guy on the right went for an uppercut. So I grabbed him around the throat as well. I suddenly had a Russian in both hands, locked their elbows out, just holding them at arm's length, trying to stop them from punching me. But I'd just taken my gloves off half an hour before that, because the temperature was up above 0. So I had bare hands around their throats. Now, neither of them they're trying to punch me, but their arms weren't quite long enough, so they're kind of swinging underneath, not being able hit, but neither had cut their fingernails. And so they started to claw at my hands and literally started to rip the skin. You saw the footage there of the webbing. One of the guys on the left put his thumbnail right through the webbing. So I've got a moonshot scar where his thumbnail went through. So I wasn't being punched, but it really wasn't working. It hurt a lot. And so I brought these, I got off balance at one point, just brought those guys together as hard as I could and took off down the road running. One of the guys jumped up with the broken walking poles and gave chase. I could hear the whoosh whoosh behind me, he was just trying to hit me. I was running with a 12-kilogram backpack and he was really unfit, so it was kind of an even race. He gave up after about 100 metres and went back to help his friend who was still down, which gave me an opportunity to slow down, to pull my camera out, and as you saw there, to start filming these guys at a distance. But as I'm filming them, trying to get my breath back after a 5-minute fight and a 100-metre sprint, a third guy comes running down the hill, also dressed in black but with a bottle of vodka in hand, whistling out to the other two guys because he wants in on the fight. And so I just had to turn and run and sprint off down the road. I finished my sentence off while running, put the camera away, and ran on down the road. It's amazing. Again, I was able to forgive those guys, but it was amazing then how I started to relive what had happened back in Costa Rica. I am amazingly awesome at Kung Fu in my head. The reality is that when I'm in a fight, I get all tense and I can't actually, I can hold people at arm's length, but I can't move properly. You know when you have those dreams where you're trying to run it and you can't? You just can't move? That's what I'm like in a fight. Well, those goats that when you go, they go and fall over. That's me in a fight. I can't move properly. But in my head, my goodness, I am phenomenal. I can do so many things in an instant and knock these guys out. And I kept reliving what had happened in Costa Rica and what had happened in Russia and in a few other occasions. And in recalling it, I beat them up. Che Guevara, a lookalike, I beat him up so many times. I thought about how I could have smashed this guy and then taken out all three in an instant. Well, not an instant, but maybe a few seconds. I had to, you've all heard, I'm sure you've all heard the scripture passage when a guy comes to Jesus and says, how many times must I forgive my brother? Anyone know what Jesus replies?
70 times 7.
Yep, 70 times 7, 77 times. I'd always thought that was for 77 or 70 odd different things that you forgive your brother for. And it never occurred to me that it could actually be the very same thing. It's the one thing that I have to forgive 77 times because I keep taking the forgiveness back. I forgive this person, but then I fall into the trap of reliving the moment and actually doing what I think I want to do, which is instead of being like Agent, who's a beggar?
Yeah.
Is that it? Instead of being like Agent who's a beggar and actually sending them, putting them on the Christmas card list of actually wanting retribution for the hurt that they inflicted and falling into that trap. You hurt me, so now I want to hurt you. You embarrassed me, so now I want to see you embarrassed. So forget about fights in Costa Rica and Russia. Don't sit there thinking, oh, this is fine for Sam to think about, but I don't intend to get on any fights in Costa Rica or Russia. Think about it just in terms of everyday relationships. Someone who embarrasses you or ridicules you, and then you want to see them ridiculed. You want to see them hurt. You want to see them fail. Someone who does really, even at school, the person who did really well at school, academically, but were a bit arrogant. Man, always wanted to see them fail. Like, just at that level. Rather than, and that's the Kung Fu coming in, rather than the forgiveness or the compassion or the humility coming in. And it's through, so tying it back into how do we either forgive ourselves or how do we forgive others? And how do we stop that scar tissue from forming? So that when we find ourselves in a situation where it's not going well, we find ourselves in a situation where we're going to be stretched, the hamstring's going to be stretched, our heart is going to be stretched. How do we deal reconciliation. It's through reading, so scripture reading of the lives of the saints. It's also through the friendship groups that we have, who we hang out with, who we are spending time with, who it is that will actually encourage us, that we have that support around us to actually stay focused, to be forgivers and not, what do you call someone who does kung fu? Kung fu? Ninja. Thank you. And not a ninja. To be a forgiver, not a ninja. Although how cool it would be to be. So the question is why, like how? How does prayer, adoration, reconciliation, scripture reading, how does that actually enable us to better forgive and properly forgive? Because the struggle I had for a long time was that I could say the words, but it actually wasn't necessarily there in my heart, or it wasn't fully healed. I think I had to forgive maybe 77 times before there was proper healing. Perhaps I'm not quite there yet. Maybe there is still the scar tissue there that I still need to work on. Why, throw some answers out here, throw some things at me. Why do you think that prayer, adoration, reconciliation, scripture reading, why would that enable us or help us to forgive better? Or allow that healing process to quicken? What do you think? And stuff. Yeah, so alright, so God is absolutely, God is the source of all forgiveness, the source of all love. Absolutely, even alright, my oldest, sorry if you didn't hear that, sharing your pain with someone else rather than keeping it bottled up. My older sister Sophie is a doctor of psychology, and her specialty is post-traumatic stress, kind of handy. And after 6 months of being home in Australia, I rang her and said, I'm really struggling. And she said, I know, I've been waiting for you to call me. I didn't feel like I could approach you and tell you you're struggling, because you just say, no. I had to wait until you were actually ready to open up. And this is just from a psychologist's point of view. She's saying, I can't ever force you to identify something. You have to identify it first and then you can work on it. So simply, in that simple action, opening up to God, being real about it. Have you guys ever heard of Sister Hilda? She's at the Benedictine Monastery, not Benedictine, yeah it is, Benedictine Monastery down in Jamboree. And Sister Hilda, well, I once heard her say that if you have never prayed the prayer, God, this sucks, you haven't ever prayed properly. You have to have at least said that once. God, this sucks, or thereabouts, something like that. To be honest with God. To be very open about what's going on. Now, someone else is going to say something? No? There's a prayer that Jesus prays on the cross after he's been tortured, he's been betrayed, and he's now been killed. And he prays, Father, forgive them for what they do, for they know not. Forgive them for they know not what they do. Through prayer, through opening up to God, and going back to this source of love and forgiveness, we're actually better enabled to forgive those around us and to forgive ourselves. Sometimes the prayer has to be, forgive me, Father, for I know not what I do. To actually just take that humility. Sometimes I'm a bit ignorant. I know it's not necessarily the best thing for me, but I just don't know sometimes how bad it is for me. But the closer we draw to God, and the more we actually, whether we understand or appreciate how much God loves me, how much God loves you, how much dignity God has created you with, the easier we can, to a point, if imagine someone's throwing fiery darts at you, you can just kind of flick them off. they stick in and you just kind of pull them off and flick them off and say, oh, I'll just put a band-aid over that, I'm okay. And you walk on. As you start to, have you ever been in a situation, I'm trying to think of an analogy for this. Have you ever been in a situation where you know the answer to something? Like absolutely, you know the answer, but someone else is trying to convince you that that's not right. For example, you have someone who does not live in Canberra coming to Canberra and trying to tell you the best way to get from your place to the shops. And you're going, no, it's down that road. They go, no, you have to go up this way, that's the shortest way. You go, no, that's a dead end. I promise you it's down here, it's down this way. And they say, no, you have to go that way. I don't know if you've ever been in that situation where you know the answer to something, whatever it may be. You're absolutely convinced that you know the answer because you've already been there so many times. It's not just you're guessing, you know it. But this person's kind of making a guess or the assumption, or they've seen something they think they know, but they're just trying to be very persuasive. In that position, imagine being in that position with God, that you know the answer. You know that you're created with beauty and with dignity. You know that God loves you more than you could ever understand and more than any other person on the face of this planet. God loves you that much. And so when someone does something or says something that is counter to that, you're able to say, okay, I hear what you're saying, or I can see what you're doing, but quite honestly, I know who I am. And despite what you're saying to me or doing to me right now, I know who I truly am. And what you're doing or saying, or what I'm doing or saying, isn't a true reflection of who I really am. Does everyone understand that? And it's through that prayer and through something like adoration, being quiet before God, going to reconciliation, that we walk that journey. So, for example, from your place to the shops, it's like walking that journey quite a few times, and then when the hurt comes, when someone's trying to take us off in a different direction, or the times when we stupidly walk off in a different direction, we can actually come back to what we know is the truth. There can be times when we know that that's the shortest way to the shops, but we think, I've never been down that road. I wonder where that goes. That might take me to the shops as well. And we walk, and then sometimes it does take us to the shops, and sometimes we just end up horrendously lost. And it's the point where we go, okay, alright, so I didn't know the way to the shops. Got to get back to that particular point. But we're able to pray that prayer of Father, forgive them for they know not what they do. They haven't recognised the beauty and the dignity that you created them with. And it's one of the most soothing, healing balms to our heart to hear that. One of the moments that crushed me the most when I was in high school was in grade 7. Year 7 camp, we were allowed to sleep in cabins with our friends. So probably 10 of us with a friend, 10 of us in this cabin. Most of them were my friends. I've just got a few crossovers, but most of my friends. And we'd been talking late as happens Year 7 camp. But it got to the point where I was genuinely tired, and so I tried to go to sleep. I roll over, but the lights are on, so it's dark. Trying to go to sleep, and someone randomly asked me a question, and I thought, okay, I'm not going to answer this. I'll just ignore it, I'll pretend I'm asleep, and then they'll stop talking to me, and I can get to sleep. But if I roll over and start talking, well, I'm going to prolong going to sleep. Next thing I know, there's someone standing, I was on the top bunk, there's someone standing next to the bunk going, Sam! Sam! I thought, not going to flinch, just going to ignore him, pretend I'm asleep. And eventually this guy went back down to his bed, and he said, no, he's asleep. And they proceeded to bag me out, thinking that I was asleep. I just made the state basketball team, under 14 state basketball team. And they started to rip me apart. That the only, and it was something that it might not sound that big, but it really did cut me. They started to say that things like, oh, the only reason he made the state basketball team is because he's really tall. Well, he's got no ability. They can't actually play. He's got no coordination. is hopeless. Like he's only in there because like his parents are friends with a coach or something, which wasn't true at all. They didn't know that. No, he thinks he's so good because he made the state basketball team. Yeah, and he's only good at other things because he's tall. And they just kept going. And then they started moving off tall. They really went to town. Now, it happens a lot. I'm sure you've all been in conversations where it's someone else who's being bagged out. They get a bit of a role. They start saying why this person is an idiot. Even people they respect. Why they don't like that person. And then someone else chimes in with something else. And and I cried myself to sleep. I started crying and just cried myself to sleep. And it hurt so much because they were my best friends. And I was suddenly aware that in so many other occasions, I'd been in on conversations where we had bagged out the other guys. And so I was able to put it in some sort of perspective and say, okay, it is kind of just the culture. And maybe they didn't mean much by it. But some of the things they had said really hurt. And I didn't want to play basketball with the guys at lunchtime anymore. I just sit on the side. And I didn't want to hang out with the guys anymore. There was one guy who hadn't said anything, and I'd recognised that I hadn't heard his voice. And I even went to Todd the next day and said, why did everyone do that? And he was just really apologetic and said, yeah, he said, I don't know. He said, I wanted to say something and stop it, but I didn't really know what to say. So I'm really sorry that happened. But it burned. And it stuck through the rest of high school. What do the other guys actually think about me? Are they just being nice to my face? But behind my back, they're completely bagging me out. You know, at the end of his talk, his father Dave going to come up to me and say, well done, thanks for coming. And then turn around to Felicity and say, okay, we're in damage mode, that was horrible. That was pathetic. Don't. You can imagine going through life with that scar, not dealing with it. How horrible that would make your life. Not trusting anyone. Basically, that's what it would come down to. I do not trust what you're saying to me. And so there was a big need. It was actually on the youth mission team where it started to. So this is many, many years later where it actually started to come out. I realised that was how I lived my life. I didn't necessarily believe what other people told me. I kind of reckoned that they would always think bad things behind the back. And so you had to quite seriously deal with it. And the only way to deal with that was through prayer and actually coming to recognise that in the end, it doesn't matter what those guys thought. What really matters is what God thinks. And from there I can then turn around and look at these guys with brotherly love. And recognise that they're all pretty cool guys. And that is the culture. They do that to each other. Unfortunately, they would all have been bagged out horrendously at some point. It was simply the culture of school. The question is whether it's someone offending us or us offending. Are we going to be like Mary Magdalene or Peter, who, in Mary Magdalene's case, she was caught in adultery, or Peter's case, where he disowns Jesus, but they receive forgiveness and walk on with Jesus? Or are we going to be like Judas, who betrays Jesus, but then drowns in his own guilt? He basically becomes so focused on the scar that he just rips at it and tears at it. I'm sure you've all either done this or you know someone who's done it. They've had a scar that's trying to heal and they just keep picking at it. And they just prolong that scar healing because they keep picking at it. And do you know, the more you pick at it, the more likely you are that you will end up with a scar in the end. If you just leave it alone and let your body do what it's supposed to do, it will heal. But you keep picking at the scar, it won't heal. You keep putting medication on it. Let the body do what it's doing from the inside, but then you put the outside medication on, you actively treat it, whatever it may be, you can better heal that scar. If you just leave it as is, 50-50, but if you go and pick at it, at this scar, and become so inward focused on that scar, you can actually end up making it a lot worse. And Judas in the end drowns in his own guilt. And so, who are we emulating? Will we receive Christ's forgiveness? What if it's this? You're all familiar with the Good Samaritan story, yeah? Okay, so what happens? Give me a rundown. Who's your main character? Okay, so the Good Samaritan and the guy that's beaten up on the side of the road, then what happens? Someone from this side. Okay, the priest walks by and just kind of ignores him. He can't really touch him, doesn't want to become unclean. He keeps walking. Yep, brilliant. So Levite comes past, doesn't want to help him, but then the Samaritan comes past, who's a sworn enemy, and he helps him up and takes him down to the inn, pays him to stay there. Now, we often focus on the Good Samaritan. We always talk about, we try and put ourselves in the position of the Good Samaritan. I don't want to do that today. I want you to try and put yourself in the position of the guy that's been beaten up in the gutter. Because what we often have a propensity to do is that when the priest walks past and actually offers help, or the Levite walks past and offers help, or the Samaritan offers help. I'm changing the story a little bit here, where all three offer help. And so often we push away, and we use that word that I think should be banned, being fine. Are you okay? Yeah, I'm fine. Seriously, I'm fine. And then they walk on and someone else comes up and says, are you okay? Yes, I'm fine. Just give me time. I've just got to bandage it up. I'm a little bit groggy now. I'm slightly unconscious, but I'll be fine in a minute. Just let me be. Or the worst one where physically we might be okay, but we just give up. We're just kind of, I don't care, I'm fine. Really? No. Don't take me to the end. I don't want your help. Leave me alone. I don't want your help. And let them walk on. Are we prepared that when someone comes to us and says, are you okay? Can I help you? Are we prepared to make that action of putting our hand up? Or if someone lifts us up, to not squirm like a 3-year-old and wriggle out of their arms, but allow them to help us. The hardest thing is when it's your parents. I think often parents don't want to get too involved in their lives, but then it's really awkward when they actually try to. It's even more awkward. But are we willing to allow them to be a part of that process? Are we going to allow our friends, teachers, any priests, whoever it may be, to help us? In particular, the ultimate Good Samaritan is Jesus. Are we prepared to allow him to reach into our life? Or are we just going to push away and go, I'm fine. Really, right now, I'm okay. And that's the challenge we need to take out into everyday life and with dealing with anything that's happened already. Thank you very much for your attention. Does anyone have any questions on anything? Whether it be the journey itself that I was talking about, or statutory reconciliation? I travelled through 20 countries, but when you consider that Russia, almost all the other countries, like the distance can be fitted into Russia itself. That was really huge going across there, but 20 countries. I can run and I can still jump, but I still feel it. It's the flexibility isn't quite there. I don't have the same flexibility I used to. that. But it's like some of the other, I've had 2 shoulder reconstructions. So the flexibility of my right shoulder is greatly reduced from the left. Again, I tried to do too much while in the healing process. I didn't let it heal as quickly as it should have done. But yeah, it's okay. Still, yeah.
You were saying you're walking around going through all these different churches. Do you have like a favorite church you went through?
As in an individual
Yeah.
church? No. No.
Did you go to any cathedrals?
Sorry?
Did you go to any cathedrals?
Oh, in the Vatican. Yeah, that was pretty impressive. Yeah, I've never been asked that question before. I don't have a pretty good answer. I don't know. Oh, funniest one was in Greek Orthodox, no, Ukrainian Orthodox Church in Canada. My brother was with me. It was the end of the day, we were walking towards a hotel and we saw the Ukrainian Orthodox Church and just walked up to it at sunset. And they were beginning their night prayers. And it is phenomenally beautiful. In fact, you saw it at the start of the video. It was the one that was all covered in gold. I'll go back to it so you can see it. I think it's the second or third shot in. That one there. Now, the whole church, that's it. Nothing else to do, but the whole church, like this massive thing, it's just gold and paintings. And we walked in there, they were beginning their night prayer, and there was only, there was the priest, and then there was maybe 5 or 6 women, and that was it. They began night prayer, but we hadn't been able to speak to the priest, so I said to Chris, my brother, we'll join in night prayer, and then I'll talk to the priest afterwards. But it was all in Ukrainian, so we couldn't understand anything that was happening. And then halfway through the service, the woman in front of us, old lady, turned around to both of us and said, "Can you boys please go and hold the candles for the priest?" And I said, we're Catholic. I said, "We don't know what's going on." And she grabbed me by the arm and said, "That's okay, you might enjoy it." But I don't understand. And she turned around. And Chris was looking at me and he's giving me a death stare. It's like, this wasn't part of the agreement. This is not why I'm here. And then all of a sudden, it gets to this point where 2 women walked out from the other side going up, and this old lady turned around to us and goes, "Quick, go. Oh." And so we both, in our full ski gear, like it's the middle of winter, we're taking our beanies off, but we're in full outdoor ski gear. We had full thermals on as well. Walked up and grabbed these 2 big candles, and we just did exact opposite to what the 2 women on the other side did, and it turned out to be correct because we didn't get told off. And so we stood there holding these massive candles, but then because the women were appropriately dressed, we were in outdoor thermal gear, and within a minute we've got sweat dripping off us, and we're starting to shake because they had these little holders, they went to the ground, put their candles on. We had grabbed those, so we're holding these massive candles, and it's like this game of torture, trying to keep it without your arms dropping, because it was heavy, this massive candle. So we're sweating, trying to hold the candle up, and at the end, finally, after 15 minutes of praying the Psalms in Ukrainian, the priest went back, and the women put the candles back, and we went back to our seats, and the little old lady turned around and goes, so that was probably the funnest. But every single church was different. In one Pentecostal church, the preacher pinned me to the ground and prayed a prayer over me, presumably a prayer of exorcism. I don't know if it worked, hopefully it didn't. It was, the reception wasn't nice in some places. Other times, it took a long time. I had to learn 9 languages. So trying to communicate with someone when you don't speak the language is very difficult, and just trying to fumble through it. So, yeah. But every church is different.
Did you get bitten by any snakes?
I wasn't bitten by any snakes. I was struck at by a lot of snakes. Had one snake actually strike right between my legs, mid-stride. In South America, I was approaching the Amazon. Walking down the jungle, to stop and suddenly realised there was a snake laid out across the branches and its head was still, and I just backed away from it very, very slowly. So it was a lot. I probably saw a snake one a day. I don't like snakes.